Welcome to the Bible Momming Podcast, where we are parenting by the book. I'm your host, Paula Whidden. This podcast is for women who struggle with regular mom stuff, but also long to have their kids grow closer to Christ. It's a lifetime journey, and we're in it together. As a real mom, you just never know where I'll be podcasting from, but I'll always be available for you. Now let's get started. Hey, mamas. I'm sitting right now in the parking lot of the karate place that my daughter goes as I'm patiently waiting for her to go through her practice. And I was thinking about you lovely ladies. I was thinking about how you also are the taxi driver. You take your kids to basketball practice, soccer practice, baseball, t-ball, swim meets, all sorts of things. And you watch them. And you are right there rooting for them and driving them from various locations. And in our cars, we have some of the best conversations, or we can. Sometimes they're ones that we want. Sometimes they're not the ones we want. I know we had one particular conversation several years ago, me and my girls, when we went past some protesters, and they were protesting the topic of gay marriage. And so then I needed to answer their questions because they were saying, what is this proposition? What is that about? Why are they yelling? And so we had a discussion. And one of the things I've learned over the years is that it's best to not avoid these discussions. It's best to not put them off, to answer the questions your kids have. But sometimes we have to start the discussion. Sometimes we have to tell them things that we don't want to tell them. And that happened in our family recently. Our pastor, one of our pastors at our church is a rather large church. One of our pastors committed suicide. And I was looking on Facebook. And because it was going to come out in the news the next day, our church needed to let people know as soon as possible. And so I'm looking through my Facebook feed, sitting at the couch as the kids are goofing off and talking. We're talking about different things as a family. And I noticed this information that the pastor had died. And I knew I needed to talk to them. I knew that they would hear about it. And that is awkward. That is hard. So today we are talking about the topic of suicides. This is not one of those ones to have the kids listen in on. Please don't have them listen in so that you can avoid having the conversation yourself. Pop in the earphones, and earbuds and whatever, and listen in your own time away from your kids so that you can be wise. I had the great opportunity to talk with the counseling pastor at a church in Pasadena. Her name is Becky White. She is a licensed therapist with her MFT, and we decided to talk about how to talk with our kids about this horrible topic of suicide that has become so rampant in our society right now. So now I want to introduce you to Becky.
I am here today with Becky White, counseling pastor at the Fellowship Church based in Pasadena, and we are talking about talking with our kids about suicide. This is not an easy topic. If the kids are nearby, please have them in another space. Becky, it is nice to talk with you.
Good to talk with you too, Paula.
Now, as you and I were talking about, I come from a church that had a pastor who committed suicide. And it seems like this is an epidemic that is going on. And our kids are witnessing it. Our kids are seeing what's going on. They see this on TV, on the news, and even at our churches. Can you help us to be wise as parents? What are some things that we can do to talk with our kids about this topic, or talk with our kids in a way that will be wise to this topic?
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that, Paula. It is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy that is growing. We see it a lot on with celebrities, people taking their lives, and every time they do, it gives people that are struggling permission to consider that in their own life. I see that regularly in my practice here at Fellowship, where there's some very public folks that have taken their life, and my people the next week are often mentioning that as an option for themselves now.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, it's like parts of our brain get connected because we get
It
exposed to
is,
that,
and then
right?
when it's a public figure that you've seen on TV or you've interacted with them, you feel a sense of knowing them. The other thing you also feel is a sense of it. They had everything, and if they would choose that, I have much less than they have. So I probably should have already chosen that. It's this very strange, complex.
Oh, that comparison. Wow.
Yeah, and when you're in a place where you're thinking suicidal thoughts, you're not thinking about reality. And the further you go in that direction, obviously, that takes you down a path that increases in its danger the longer you're there. But regardless of that, I want to get back to your question, Paula, of as parents talking to our children. Sadly, I've sat with families and looked at little children whose dad took their own life.
Yeah.
And when you have a very small child, they need very little information.
Okay.
They need to know a ton about what's happened. There's not a way for young children to be able to process that choice.
It's hard enough for us, right?
It absolutely is. And when you think of your dad when you're the age of 3 or 4 and you think of your dad choosing to leave you and never come back, that's a really hard thing to process. They're going to know soon enough, sooner than they should. And at that point, there's going to be enough of a battle to help them understand it. Statistics say something like up to 30% more frequent or more likely a family member is when someone in their near family has committed suicide. So if a brother or sister or parents, your children are much more likely, up to, in some statistics say 30% more likely. So once that information is clear to a child with someone that is in their family, their blood relative, they're going to have their own battle because it is now a possibility for them. Whereas for most children and most young people, as they think through their lives, they don't know anyone who's taken their life.
Right.
But when you have someone in your family, that's a unique battle. So we don't want to have our kids fighting that battle too early. So as young children, they hear about their pastor in your instance, you don't need to give what happened to him when especially they're not asking.
Right.
None of that information ever needs to be offered up to a child.
Okay.
As kids get older, and again, you're not lying to them, but most small children don't ask how it happened. They just really know concretely that person was here and now they're not here. And so don't offer information that they're not directly asking about. Does that make sense?
That's something that I think is actually important as a general rule in parenthood, for the most part. Like, they're asking based on where they're at.
Yeah, exactly. And when a child is cognitively wondering about something, you can answer that in the simplest possible way, but don't offer information that they're not asking about. And that's one of the reasons we want to shelter our kids from exposure earlier than they should be thinking about these things cognitively. We don't want to show them things on TV and things even on the news that would cause them to have to think about something too early, where their brain's not developed enough to be able to hold that information. So that's one of the reasons there's ratings on TV shows and movies, because children aren't ready to handle that information, whether it's violence or language or content of a sexual nature. They just aren't cognitively ready to be around that. So they shouldn't be given that information voluntarily. It's hard enough when they ask.
Because they don't know what to do with it, right? And then it can come out in different ways that you never, ever intended.
Exactly. And I like to say there's no line item in their brain for it. There's just nowhere for it to go. Once you have someone who has taken their life that is somewhat public in your life, for example, your pastor, where people and teenagers and people are going to hear that they took their own life, they know that word suicide. They know that goes along with something. I think, again, it's a good time to let them know that you want to talk with them if they're ready to talk. If they have questions, you would just discuss it together. Suicide is something that none of us can be an expert on. Nobody really, really, truly knows, but it's certainly a safe discussion and taken very carefully and sincerely. One of the questions children are going to ask, especially of a pastor, is he in heaven?
Yeah.
And that's a really hard question.
Because you don't know. That's not something you can actually know.
Well, you can't know that about anyone. And so I think that's a good place to start. I heard a great answer to that question many years ago. Jill Briscoe, who's a wonderful theologian, quite a few years senior to me, was once asked that question, will a person who takes their own life be in heaven? She absolutely answered immediately, yes, she believed they would. But the one thing they would have to answer from Jesus is, why was I not enough? Which is a really, really beautiful way to look at that question. When people are struggling at the level of suicide ideation, they're not thinking correctly. That doesn't mean they don't have an authentic faith at all. It just means they're not thinking correctly in that season of their life. No one who is able to process information would believe that taking your own life was the best solution to any problem that they're facing. It's illogical for your brain to go there. But when your brain is not thinking correctly, you can get yourself so far outside of how you should think that feels like it's a real solution in that moment.
Well, and there's certainly a lot of conversation now about how various medications that people take when they go on or off them can affect how the brain fires, how the different neurons and things of the brain work. And so there's a lot of discussion, I guess, about that as well.
And I think that's why we have to be in community, regardless of what is making us struggle with our thoughts. We have to sit in community with people to say, I'm thinking this way. Can you help me back away from this? And when I have folks that come into my office where they are actively struggling with suicide ideation, where they are in that process of actually pondering what they would do or where they would go, that's a conversation that we take so seriously. Whenever I'm in that conversation, the first thing I'm thinking about is, am I the right person for them to be talking to? Do they need me to call 911 on them right now? Do they need someone who specializes in this? Those are conversations we always have to have in our head. None of us should feel like when we're talking to someone who is at that place of despondency that we would have every answer for them. It's always safe to recognize that every therapist, no matter how much education you have, you always consult up.
Okay.
You always think about, is there a medical place that this person needs to have some intervention in right now? Once you've determined that they're safe and they're not doing anything today, they're not an immediate threat to themselves, then you can begin a conversation about kind of walking them away from that ledge and helping them think about their life in a different way and creating a plan for them to make sure that they stay away from that edge, whatever that edge is for them. And so that's a way to take someone who's struggling with some of those thoughts to back away from that space. Once a child hears that someone has made that decision, we as adults need to not judge that person, and we don't need to sound like we're judging them.
Right, because we don't have that right.
Right. We just need to say that person was really hurting. And it was the saddest part is that there is help for that person that they can get free of charge. There's a phone number they could have called. There's a lot of ways that person could have gotten help, but at the moment they didn't choose to do that.
Now, out of curiosity, how would you deal with that as far as, I have 2 daughters who are teenagers, and we got to have that lovely conversation. And so now, you say your kids are teenagers. What would you say would be wisdom in that arena?
Well, I think every opportunity in our lives, no matter if it's good or bad, is an opportunity to learn something. It's an opportunity for your kids to ask you questions and for you to give a very honest answer to say, I feel so bad that person was contemplating that and I didn't know it. I feel so sad about that. But it's also an opportunity for you to say to your daughters, there is not a problem too big that you couldn't talk to me about it. There's not a problem too big that you couldn't talk to God about it. And most of all, there's not a problem too big that it cannot be solved, because it's not a solution for you to take your life.
Clearly there are ripples. Clearly if 30% of the kids have that as another issue, and I'm thinking about spouses and all the people they influence and things like that, it's not like that's a one and done experience.
Right. So it is an opportunity, though, to say, This is, if this is anything you're afraid about, there's nothing that you could ever think or do or feel that's too hard for God, or even too hard for me to hear from you. As a parent, it's always good to be able to be open enough and honest enough, and most of all, gracious enough for your children to know that they can have really hard conversations with you, and not feel, either by your words or most of all your expressions, that they're being judged by you.
And that's something that takes practice as a parent, is learning how to listen without giving away the inner thoughts.
Right. Absolutely. I remember some moments with my boys, and they would just call me on it every time. They'd say, "Mom, don't be afraid right now." Because even though I wasn't saying a word, they could sense in my body language or my expression that I was really struggling to be open about whatever we were talking about in that moment. So the best thing that we as parents can do when anything comes up that is impossible for us to understand, including suicide, terrorist attacks, things that come out that none of us can understand, none of us can even process, is that we are already right next to our kids, so that there is a great basis of trust. So it's another conversation. It just has a different topic, but we've had conversations with our kids every single day. And this is another kind of conversation that obviously has a different topic, but it's not foreign to us to talk with our kids. It's not foreign to us, most of all, to listen to our kids. One of the things I tell parents a lot when I'm doing workshops is, by the time our children are 4, we should cut our words in half, knowing that most of what we're saying, we're repeating ourselves. And when they get about 11 years old, we should cut our words in half again. And I really try to practice that with my sons.
That is so hard for moms, because we have so many words.
We have so many words, and they are almost all repetitive, where our kids at some point begin to think we don't trust them when we say the same thing over and over again. It is so much more important, in my opinion, to be proximate to them. So be very nearby them, so that they always know that you would choose to be with them, not in an annoying way because you're not talking or telling them something, but just in a way that lets them know that they're who you want to be with. And so those kind of conversations can happen as we learn in early in Deuteronomy, where it says, as you walk along the way, as you sit and as you stand. I don't think Moses was saying, as you're talking to your kids, it's as you're with them. And I think that we can happen on to those kind of conversations. And when life gets really hard and tedious, and the kinds of conversations change to be very, very meaningful and important for them to hear, it's not hard for you to take up a listening posture, to have them communicate what they're afraid of, what they're thinking about. And you just continue to say the same kinds of things you've always said to them, the same calmness, the same sense of hope, the same sense of graciousness and gratitude. But that shouldn't change no matter the topic. They should know that you're consistent throughout. So it's not that nothing catches you by surprise, but the same truths and answers you've always had are continuing to be the right answer when life turns hard and confusing.
That is great insight. I appreciate that so much. Now, you are counseling people on a regular basis, and is there anything that we can do to pray for you as you talk to different families about these kind of hard topics?
I have an appointment coming in a few minutes of a young girl who's struggling with that. We have a large church. We had a suicide in our church this last year of a young person, which was very hard. This comes up, as it does in your church, sadly, touched throughout our people as well. Whenever there's violence in our community, we see it in our church in terms of the manifestation. We've had victims of some of our larger shootings that attend our church, and trying to talk to them every time a new shooting happens, processing with them how they feel about life right now, and just the trauma that goes on with our young people because they're exposed to so much, as we spoke about earlier. These are very serious issues folks come in with, so we always want to cover them well. with prayer. We want to cover them well with some mental health tools. Most of all, we want to cover them with the fact that God is never going to leave them or forsake them. He is very present for them, never beyond what they could reach. They just need to know He's okay with them. And He, though quiet, is like a parent who is still always there. That's the main thing we want our people to know.
Thank you so much. This has been really helpful, and I hope it's blessed a lot of the moms as they're listening. I'm really grateful that you could do this and have this conversation with me.
Okay, Paula, good to talk with you as well.
Thank you for sticking around and listening to that whole podcast. I know that's a tough one to listen to and a tough one to just digest for ourselves. And yet I also know that we are people who suffer in this as well. It can be our kids that are dealing with it, but it also can be us, because being a mom can be a lonely job. As I'm sitting in my car right now by myself, I'm very aware of that. And I just wanted you to know that you are valuable, that what you do matters, and you make such a major impact in the lives of your family. So as tough as this topic is, I really wanted to come alongside you and help you. And also it created a group for moms to be able to connect with each other on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, come check it out. It is called the Facebook Bible Momming Group. I'd love to have you join so that you can be part of our conversations. But I'm on different social media. I am Paula Whiddon on just about every site. So please come and follow me and connect with me. That's PaulaWhidden. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear questions or concerns, things that are going on in your lives, because as I've been going through this and getting this particular episode ready, I've just been praying for you all and the different things that you need to share with your families. If you want to hear more of these discussions, more of these episodes, please be sure to subscribe to the Bible Momming Podcast and click that little button with the check mark or the plus sign so that you can hear these episodes each time they come out. I'm also going to make sure that I put a bunch of information for you in the notes for this podcast. You can go to BibleMomming.com and get those notes. You just look at the podcast episode, and I will have some resources for you if you want to learn more about how to help your family, how to be wise on the topic of suicide. I've enjoyed this time we have together. I know you have plenty of things to do and many options, so thank you for listening. Remember, love is patient, love is kind, and that is never more real than in our families. God bless you and have a great week.